The second speaker in the 2018 La Trobe Innovation in Food and Agribusiness Forum is Joann Wilkie, First Assistant Secretary of Agricultural Policy Division in the Department of Agriculture and Water. The title of Joann's presentation is Towards 2030, Innovation and Productivity Growth in Agricultural Sector. Joann began by asking the question if Australia's agriculture was ready to grow. The agriculture sector has set an aspirational target for reaching 100 billion in gross value of production by 2030. Joann suggests that the target is reachable, but dependent on accelerating the sector's productivity growth. Innovation is crucial to accelerating this growth. While we're in a period of growth in trade and demand for Australia's agricultural exports, this is accompanied by increasing competition from other exporting countries, changing consumer expectations, and more stringent market access requirements. So the challenge for Australia is to increase its yield and efficiency of agricultural production while relying on fewer resources and inputs and mitigate variations in climate conditions. Australia also needs to find cost-effective ways of responding to demands of our trading partners and customers who have rising expectations on provenance and credence, traceability, production systems, safety and quality assurance. So please enjoy Joann's presentation.
So let me get started. I'm going to talk about three things today. A little bit about setting the scene, quick snapshot of Australian ag. I am going to focus on ag rather than food more broadly. I have issues with that. You should have issues with that. And I'll come to why in a second. Then I'm going to have a quick look at some of the challenges and opportunities facing Australian ag as we look towards 2030. Mark already mentioned some of the megatrends, so I'm going to have a quick look at that and what that means for innovation. And then I'm going to take a slightly deeper look at the role of innovation and productivity in addressing these challenges. So unlike James, I'm not going to be able to give you a model for how to run a great business, but hopefully what I'm going to be able to give you is the set of priorities that the federal government has when it comes to the ag and the agri-food sectors of the economy. And if you're engaging with government at any level, hopefully some of the stuff I'm about to set out for you will help you be able to engage a bit more better by understanding where we're coming from when we look to things like innovation in agriculture and agri-food. So I've got two computers going here, so I'm confusing myself. So a little bit on the ag sector in Australia. So the first thing is that the production in agriculture is growing. It's grown by about over 30% over the past 20 years, and we're now a $60 billion industry. Again, that's just agriculture. It doesn't include food processing and food manufacturing. So agriculture accounts for over 50% of land and water use in Australia. It accounts for about 14% of our exports in goods and services, and it's just under 3% of our economy, and it's about just under 3% of our employment. So you can see from that agriculture does, and food, therefore, by association, food more generally, the favourite phrase in government with this sort of thing is always punches above its weight in terms of an export industry. Productivity in the sector is growing. At the moment, it is actually growing slightly faster than the rest of the economy, but over time it's been slowing. And that, as I used the quote before from Paul Krugman, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run it is almost everything when it comes to having a successful industry or a successful economy, and growing incomes come to that. So exports are continuing to grow. Again, there's been over 30% growth in Australian exports over the past 20 years. Australian agriculture has a very high export intensity. 70% of the agricultural produce that is grown in Australia is exported. That is remarkably high when you consider us in comparison to countries, other big agricultural countries like France or Canada or the US. and the intensity of our industries varies. So our fibre producers, cotton and wool, export almost all of what they produce. And then running through the industries, so you've got beef and wheat in the 70%, dairy around 40%. So a lot of that is, of course, not going overseas as fresh milk, it's going over as milk products. So powdered milk and things like butter and cheese, and then down to the horticulture sector, which predominantly exports fresh fruit and vegetables into the Asian markets. So going back to something James also mentioned about the quality, I guess, of agricultural businesses in Australia, I would be willing to bet that the average benchmark against business systems for agriculture would be way down at the 0.5 mark. 1.3 sounds a little high for agriculture. That last stat I've got there, the top 20% of Australia's producers produce almost three-quarters of our total agricultural produce. That tells you there is a very, very long tail of poorer performers in the agricultural sector. That top 20%, they're far bigger in terms of farm size or business size. They are far more productive, they are far more innovative, they earn a lot more money, and they're a lot more profitable. That is an issue for a lot of the challenges that I'm just about to start talking about. They don't have the resources, whether it's in terms of the capital, the finance, the know-how, the business systems and management to be able to engage with some of the challenges that are coming towards Australian agriculture. So, Mark mentioned megatrends. So these are the CSIRO 7 megatrends. These are about to be updated. So these are 3 years old, but they don't change too much because they're looking forward sort of like 40 or 50 years. But CSIRO promised they were going to publish the next set in September, and it's November, and maybe they'll come out this year. Anyway, so megatrends, what are they? The Silk Highway, so that's the growing emerging economies in Asia in particular, not just the growing populations there, but in particular, again, as Mark already mentioned, the growth in incomes there. They're moving from low-income countries to middle-income countries. It has a massive difference in terms of what they're choosing to purchase, and this megatrend links in then with the Great Expectations, which is all about that all-important consumer experience. You don't just buy Nike because you need a new pair of running shoes. You're buying a pair of Nikes because you're going to unleash your inner athlete and just do it. So consumer experience is really important in the food industry, particularly when you've got consumers in some of our major trading partners who are looking for a food experience. They don't just want to pick up an apple. They want to pick up an apple that's being grown in the Southern Highlands, and there's a whole lifestyle experience that goes with it. More from less, we want to achieve, we've got more people to feed, our resources are more constrained. Planetary pushback, not just climate change, but superbugs and other parasites and things that are pushing back on things we're trying to do. Forever young, we've got ageing populations across the globe, but we've also got the emphasis on health, and so therefore again another connection through to ag and food is around the wanting to know what are the nutritional values of food. How can you get the superfoods movement, the almond milk is better for you than milk from a cow kind of issue as well. And then the final one that's there is the porous boundaries. So increasing trade, but also networks become important. Again, networks between farmers, understanding the way information moves between borders and that sort of stuff. So all of those trends which are affecting the globe are also having an effect on our agricultural producers and our food producers in Australia, and pushing us in different ways. So at the moment, we've essentially got a period of major growth in trade and a major growth in demand for Australia's exports, but that's being accompanied by increasing competition from exporting countries like China, like Brazil, but also like some of the stalwarts like the US and Canada. We've got changing consumer expectations. We've got more stringent market access requirements as protectionist sentiments are being stirred by things like Brexit and the American president. And all of those factors are then set against a background of changing technology possibilities, increasing populations, and things like climate change. So it's a very challenging time to be in something like agriculture. So what do those challenges mean? The National Farmers Federation earlier this year announced that it had an aspirational target for the agricultural industry of $100 billion in farm output by 2030. So we're currently at about $60 billion. There's already been a lot of work done by a lot of economists and a lot of agricultural economists in Australia to find out, is that feasible? Is it a stretch target? Is it not a stretch target? Is it a feasible target? Can we get there? If you simply look at the historical growth rates of our ag industries over the past sort of 10 years and you project that forward, we come within spitting distance of it. It's about 98 billion. But that's a very strong assumption when you look at all of the changes that are in our current environment and the fact that agricultural prices across most of our commodities have been at historical highs over the past 10 years. So, can we get to $100 billion? Let's have a look at some of the challenges we've got. So, as I said, 70% of Australian agricultural produce is exported. We are a large exporter in terms of the percentage of what we produce, but we're a small player in a global market. So we're a price taker for the economists in the room. We don't have much influence on prices. However, we are, so the good thing about that is it does mean we have room to grow. We're not going to be flooding markets, even if we increase the amount of apples we grow or other products that we grow, we're such a small producer on a global scale, we're not going to flood markets. So we're not seen with too much suspicion. But because we are such big exporters, we're exposed to some of those increasing risks that I've already mentioned. The rising protectionist sentiment, changing consumer preferences, competitive pressures, increasing trade, the evolving technology, falling prices, and sustainability issues. The question is, are we ready to address those challenges and are we ready to grow? So if you're not familiar with public service parlance, my secretary, the head of my department, gave a speech at the National Farmers Federation Congress in October, and his assessment was, we're doing okay. We're not doing particularly well against some of those things. And things like needles in strawberries, adulteration in honey, listeria on rock melons are really good examples recently of things where Australian agriculture could be doing a lot more, and food businesses could be doing a lot more. One of the assessments has been in that sort of thing is that Australian farmers still consider themselves to be the noble farmer. Growing food is a noble enterprise. They don't consider themselves to be food producers and part of a global food system. And that's one of the big challenges that we need to address as a sector if we're going to grow to $100 billion and if we're going to continue to grow, particularly in our export markets. So this slide, innovation is integral to addressing all of those challenges that I listed on the previous slide. So productivity, obviously innovation is key to improving productivity, but whether you're talking logistics systems, improving your certification, better quality assurance, more credible quality assurance, better integrity and tracing of product, whether you're looking to expand your markets, whether you're looking to innovate new products, when you're looking at your reputation and your social license issues, or whether you're looking at ways to address the non-tariff measures, barriers that are being put in place by trading partners, innovation is core to all of that. And it is talking about the entire food supply chain, not just about what's grown on a farm. So I'll go quickly through, I'm an economist by training and I've spent a lot of time working in productivity. So productivity is one of my true loves, but I won't bore you to tears with too much on ag productivity. But basically, productivity and innovation, why should we care about it? I've already obviously indicated that productivity is pretty key to addressing a lot of those challenges. Australia's a pretty competitive producer, partly because of our past productivity growth. We've kept up pretty well with other developed countries who are some of our key competitors. So this slide's showing you Canada, US and New Zealand. We're all in pretty much the same band when it comes to productivity growth. Bit more of a disconcerting story if you have a look at what happens. Sorry, it helps if I show you the slide. So that's against our other developed countries. It's not quite so good if you look at what happens against some of our emerging competitors, China and Brazil, for example. Their productivity growth is outpacing ours by a big margin. True, they're coming off a much larger base, but their resources that they have available to be able to grow the size of their agricultural sector outpace us by a big margin. One of the few edges we have over them is our innovation, our use of ag tech, digital technologies, and the best thing that we've got over them is our governance systems. Our ability to say credibly, we grow clean, green agricultural produce. That comes back to that all-important reputation box I had there. So why does productivity matter? We're a high-cost producer. We are competing against other countries who subsidise their agricultural producers. So increasing our productivity means that we'll be able to compete with them even though their costs are being subsidised. We've got all of those negative challenges with potential negative impacts that I was talking about: falling prices, variable climate, greater competition for our resources. Improving our productivity means that we're going to be more resilient and more adaptable to those pressures and challenges. And also, again, more assertive, more interested customers in what we're doing, who are interested in things like what is happening to the domestic animal welfare of how we're treating our dairy cows. They're interested, if you don't believe me, that is coming up in the EU FTA trade negotiations, those sorts of issues. More demanding trading partners as well, looking for greater assurances about the certification of our products and that sort of thing as well. And that sort of thing, it sounds like government regulation, and some of it is, but some of it is also, it's one thing to have the government regulation and to have the government's rubber stamp on it, but how well is a producer doing to meet their part of that bargain? We have in the department, we sponsor lots of audits coming through from foreign countries into rendering plants, onto farms. You would think that producers, given that they on average export 70% of what they produce, would understand the importance of being ready for an audit of that nature. We have a lot of fails. It's quite disconcerting. So, productivity, where does it come from? It depends on institutions and culture, like, what is our culture around the importance we place on things like biosecurity and audits. What's our physical infrastructure, the transport, the logistics infrastructure, what's our economy, the economic infrastructure like, and then on-farm productivity. That's where you finally get to talking about things like your yield from your cotton plant. So what are our prospects for productivity growth? As I said, productivity growth has slowed in the last couple of decades compared to towards the end of the 20th century. So a number of reasons for that. One, Australia got a massive boost from a series of one-off reforms that we undertook in the 1980s and 1990s, the microeconomic reform that you've probably all heard about. We reduced trade barriers, we deregulated the economy, we made investments in infrastructure, we changed the way we do monetary policy and fiscal policy, we changed some rules around labour policy. All of that had an impact on how productive our economy was as a whole, but it was a one-off boost to growth, it wasn't a continuing boost to growth. So that affected agriculture as well. Agriculture's had deteriorating seasonal conditions over that time, and as governments, we have been putting less money into research and development efforts, which means our intensity in that has gone down as well. Because of those microeconomic reforms from the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of the changes that could improve agricultural productivity in Australia have already been made. We've pretty much deregulated every single agricultural sector, and we've already gotten most of the benefit out of bigger farm sizes and restructures in those industries. improving our productivity growth from here on out is going to be a lot harder than it was in the past. But there are some positive signs. As this chart shows, cropping farms appear to have had an increase in their productivity growth over the last few years. We're well placed to have these improvements, but it's going to take a solid effort from everybody involved. So, in talking about innovation, there's Australian agriculture, again, probably more talking about that top end or more talking about the, in some ways, some of the bespoke parts of the ag system to some extent are incredibly innovative. In the last couple of years, we've had new monitoring tools for tree crops. So they use satellite imagery. Not only can they detect where a crop has been damaged following a natural disaster, like a cyclone coming through, they can also compare yield rates and use that as part of a decision-making process for which parts of the farm they might want to treat in different ways, and they can also use it for biosecurity and pest monitoring. Insect-resistant cotton. GM cotton in Australia is one of our major success stories with the use of GM cotton. The yields have increased, and cotton is one of Australia's success stories when it comes to the world, because our yields are, I think it's 6 times better than anywhere else in the world that grows cotton. So it's one of the outliers compared to some of the statistics James had shown us earlier in the day. Insecticide use on farms using GM cotton is down 95%. Land and water use is down 30 and 40% respectively, and annual productivity is up 4%. So again, that's a big success story. Australia and Germany are also the only 2 countries in the world that have robotic rotary dairies at the moment. So robots milking cows, and the CSIRO and some other partners has put together a thing called Yield Profit, where farmers can use an app to forecast what the yield from their wheat crop is likely to be, given the climatic conditions and the soil moisture and a whole heap of other variables that are put in. So those are some of the innovations that have been delivered recently. There's also ones that are in train. More robots, so having your broccoli watered, pesticide and weed killer and whatever used on it by a robot and then picked by a robot. So the robot trundles along and it's got sensors underneath and it's able to do a whole heap of things. We won't need human shepherds anymore or fences anymore. We're going to e-fencing and virtual fencing and e-shepherds. So where you can literally set fencing boundaries on your computer, the dongle hanging off your cow's neck will mean that it will turn away when it comes close to a virtual boundary. And then the other one is objective carcass measurement. So it's using X-ray technology and robotics to cut meat. So it's already available for sheep. We're now looking at trying to have that in place for cattle carcasses. The sorts of yield benefits that could come for that are reducing waste by about 30% and being able to get better quality cuts for consumers. So there's again, the consumer angle is coming out here. The thing with the eShepherd is that they've also discovered that using eShepherd technology to muster cattle to the transport that then takes it to the abattoir reduces adrenaline, which improves the quality of and the taste of the meat. So compared to mustering via motorbike or helicopter. And you can also, if you're talking about the extensive livestock farming in northern Australia, instead of mustering via helicopter and getting the cattle to move a very long distance in a short period of time, by using eShepherd and the virtual fencing, you can move them over a period of weeks rather than a period of days. And again, the cattle are in better quality, which leads to better quality meat. So this theme around consumers and paying attention to what consumers want is really starting to come through quite clearly, even in innovations and ag tech that is just on the farm. farmers in Australia are starting to think quite a lot about what does it mean for the supply chain, what does it mean for the consumer. So just to finish up, what does this, everybody always asks, so what does the government do in all of this? So basically the government has a few roles, particularly the federal government, quite different from state governments, which are always a lot closer to the people that they provide services to. From the Commonwealth Government's perspective, we have a really crucial role in ensuring that there's effective policy settings for a vibrant economy, whether it's the transport that takes our produce from farm to the consumer, whether it's ensuring that we've got regulations. So as with a lot of things in our federation, domestic animal welfare is enforced by the states and territories, but the Commonwealth Government sets national policy standards. Similarly, in biosecurity or a whole heap of other things, the legislation or the policy setting might be done at the Commonwealth level, but it's enforced through the states and territories. The Australian Government makes a significant investment each year in rural and agricultural R&D. We have an investment every year between CSIRO, the CRCs and the RDCs, the Rural Research and Development Corporations and the Cooperative Research Centres of over $1 billion. We also have a role in tackling economy-wide issues, so things like engaging. So my department has a lot of agricultural trade counsellors who are based overseas, so things like the current or the recent disruptions in relationships with China. We spend a lot of time working on those sorts of issues as well. What's the role of industry? I go back to my previous slide. It's dealing with all of those things and making sure that they're paying attention to all of those things and dealing with those. So the bottom line is basically Australian agriculture has a lot of room to grow. We've got a decent track record. We've got a lot of challenges that we need to face, and we need to deal with those a lot more effectively than we probably have been if we're going to maintain our international competitiveness and get to that big round number of $100 billion by 2030.